Hello, I'm Ian, and in this video we'll be making this planter box that can be made in your living room on a workmate with a small number of hand woodworking tools. I've made a prototype, so let's have a look to see what you're letting yourself in for. The outside of the planter box is made of decking material that is pressure treated, so you can leave it outside and it won't rot. The normal decking material that you buy has got a textured surface on one side and a plain surface on the other. But the material that I ended up using has got a textured surface on both sides. So in order to get the smooth surface I want on either side of the planter box, I've had to plane off that second textured surface. The size of the planter trough that I'm using for this particular planter box is 400mm long and 165mm wide, and that's governed the inside measurements of my frame. If your planter trough is a slightly different size, you can simply work out what the dimensions will be for your particular size trough. The two end bits are made with joints, and this will be cutting later, but they're called lap joints. And what that means is that the two components fit together, and by putting a couple of decking screws into the joint, we can make that really firm. The last thing that I need to say is that the depth of the planter box has to be the same as the depth of your planter trough. So that distance in my case is 125mm. In previous videos I've shown you how to use a tenon saw and your index finger to place the saw exactly on the line to cut. But because with this work we're going to be using a hand saw, which is a lot more vicious than a tenon saw, it's got quite big teeth on it, I don't recommend that you use your fingers or thumbs to line it up. Instead we'll make a block of wood that we can use as a guide instead of our finger. So we'll make that block of wood 160 long, and we'll saw it in exactly the same way as we're used to. You can use your old tri-square and extend it using a steel rule, but for the purpose of this project it might be worth investing in a slightly bigger tri-square so that you don't have to fiddle around like that. So we'll draw ourselves a line as usual at 160, and as we did before we're going to use our knife to cut the fibres to make sure that we don't get any breakout, and we're going to cut ourselves a dead accurate line because we want this to be dead on 90 degrees to this edge, and we also want it to be a dead vertical cut as well. So we'll just continue that line all the way around, picking up that marking knife line from that edge, taking it around that corner and then picking it up on that far side. It's a bit tricky because you've got chamfered corners on here, so you're going to have to be a bit careful making sure that line comes back to where you started. Ping it into the groove you've made and finish that off. And we're now going to saw with our tenon saw on the waste side of that line. So this is the bit we're keeping, this is the bit that's going to be thrown away or kept, and we'll be sawing on the left hand side of that line. Notice that I put two bits of hardboard under my timber so that I don't saw through onto my workmate. We can use our finger because this saw has got small teeth on, it's not going to cut us. We're going to position our saw in the right place, put our foot on the workmate and be careful to follow that line exactly, because any mistakes we make on this cut are going to be reproduced in the rest of the project. So take your time and make sure that you're following that line exactly. Remember, not too much pressure on the saw, if any. Let the saw do the work. And when you've got through to the other side, you can concentrate on following the vertical line that you've got nearest to you. And we're pretty much through. Good. Now if I check that for squareness, it should be that we're dead square in that direction, which we are, and we're dead square in that direction, which we are too. Good. Now we can use this as a guide to cut the components for our planter box. And the first bit we're going to do is to cut a piece 122 millimeters long, which is the size of the end bit. And we can do that using our steel rule. The longer bits we're going to have to use a tape. So make sure that's nice and flush on the end of the work there. Measure 222 millimeters is exactly. Draw yourself a line through the mark and then we'll check it. Dead on 222, just as we need. We'll put our knife into the mark and we'll draw ourselves the line that we're used to. But this time we're going to draw a second line. And the second line is going to be the thickness of the saw cut that we're going to get with that hand saw. And I know from experience that that's pretty much a millimetre wide. Now if you do it slightly over, it's not going to matter too much, but you want to make sure that your next line is pretty much the same thickness as the saw cut you're going to put in there. So we've got two lines now. That means that when we saw through the material, we won't get any breakout on this piece, which we're going to use for the end bit, and we won't get any breakout on this piece, which we'll probably be using for the next end bit. So having got your two lines established on that side, you merely continue them all the way around as you're used to doing, but instead of one line, you've got two lines. So we continue that one, continue that one, and then we'll bring those round. Pretty good. And you position that really carefully on the waist side of the furthest line. And then what you do is to flex the saw so that it's just the tip of the saw that's doing the cutting. I'm holding the saw 3 fingers, 1 finger thumb. So the saw's held up against your guiding block and you're sawing as vertically as you can judge. And then when you've got that cut established, you can gradually drop the handle, keeping an eye on the line that you're cutting to. And don't drop it too quickly. Gradually take the saw cut across the work until you're cutting all the way across that top surface. And when you've established that, you'll see that it isn't breaking out on either side of your line. You could dispense with that now because you've got your kerf started. So you settle your saw in the kerf and you concentrate on this edge here so that you're sawing dead vertically. And you take your time. Just with a tenon saw, try and use as many of the teeth as you can. So long strokes without any pressure down at all. The saw is going to take itself into the work without you pushing down on it. And long strokes. Keeping a close eye on keeping that line dead vertical. And you'll hear when you're through the work because it'll be a different sound because you'll be sawing into your piece of hardboard. So take the saw out, take the piece of work out, and you'll find that that edge is not only dead at 90 degrees to the edge of the work, but it's also dead vertical as well. And that really is the secret of all the cutting we're going to be doing in this project. To have a double line that you're using a handsaw to cut in between to cut components to length, or you're using a single line to use the handsaw against on the waste side to cut joints, or, as we'll be doing now, using a single line to cut each of our individual components to width. Now what I've got to do is to make this 125mm wide, and I look out to see if there's any blemishes or any knots I can get rid of in that process, but there aren't. So I'm going to put a dot at exactly 125mm, making sure that's dead flush. So spot on 125. I can now set my marking gauge onto that dot, so I know that any line that I draw parallel to that edge is going to be dead in the right place. Now, holding the marking gauge correctly, 3 fingers, 1 finger thumb, I can draw my line along the wood parallel to that edge. Make sure that it's not following the grain, I'm actually getting the spur to go in a straight line. It's not deviating because of the grain. And I can then make that more visible by going over that with a sharp pencil. I can go over the end of the work, and similarly I can go over the other side. And down that short side as well. And go over the whole thing with a pencil so I know where I am with that cut when it comes. And now what I've got to do is to saw on the waste side of that line just to take this piece off, and I'll save that bit because I'll be using that for the feet of the planter box later. And we'll set that work up so that there's about 6 inches, something like that, showing above, so it's not too wobbly. Now, really important we follow this line correctly, so I'm going to put my thumb on the line. I'm going to bring my knuckle up so that rather than the teeth running along my thumbnail, they're actually following my knuckle. And I'm going to just drag the saw towards me until I've got a cut, or if you want to be posh, a kerf, that's just kissing that line. And once I've established that curve, I can start cutting along the grain. Check the other side to make sure I'm following the line, which I am. Take your time over it, because until you're used to using the saw, you need to keep on checking that it's following the line as it should be. Check both sides to make sure you're not deviating. Looking good. And you keep on sawing until you're in danger of sawing into your workmate. So you've got a little way to go yet. So that's probably as far as I want to go with that. Then I can take up the work another couple of inches. And then that last bit we can put over the side of the workmate just to get that last bit cut. And we can put an angle on the saw now, which will help increase the area that we're sawing, and we'll get through the work a little quicker. When you get near the end, take any pressure you might be putting on the saw, which shouldn't be much, off, and slow down so that it saws through rather than breaks off. There we are. So we've now cut that to width, and it's nice and square and straight. And now I'm going to plane off this moulding on the top here, because I don't need that, and if you've got a piece like this, neither will you. But I doubt if you'll have to plane that. Now when I'm planing, I'll do one bit at a time, so I'll start off with this piece at the end. So the first thing I have to do is to measure the total distance across both those moulded surfaces, because I won't be planing off this surface on the long bits. And the total distance across the high points of those mouldings is 28 millimetres exactly. So the shoulder line for my joint, I have to make exactly 28 millimetres from each end. So we'll do the marking up on both ends, I think, so that we can do the whole piece. So making sure that steel rule's really flush with that edge, I put a dot spot on 28. And using my square against my reference edge, which won't be my sawn edge because we can't be certain that that's dead straight. So my reference edge is going to be the machined edge that I've got here. I'm going to draw my line across. And we'll check it. I would say it's about 0.2 too wide. So when I come to do my marking knife line, I'm going to just get that marking knife to go slightly to the right of that pencil line. So not on it, slightly to the right of it, by about 0.2 of a millimetre. And then I can feel comfortable, make sure he squares up against it, I can feel comfortable drawing that line across. And when I measure that scribe line, I should be dead on what I'm after, which I am, exactly 28 millimetres. I'm going to ping my knife into that cut mark, bring my square up to it, making sure my knife is vertical. I'm just going to start making that cut to there, and then I'm going to swap my knife for a pencil so that that's in exactly the right place. And similarly this time, I'm going to pop my knife into there, ping my knife into the groove, bring my square up to it, and go down here with the pencil. I'm going to do the same the other end. Good. So we're going to put a line now, using our marking gauge, that gives us the depth of our lap joint. And it's going to be 9 millimetres because it's roughly a third of the total thickness of the work. So we'll set our marking gauge to 9 millimetres. The way we do that is to loosen the fence so that it slides, but only under a certain amount of pressure. It doesn't slide by itself. Pop the pin into the 9 millimetre mark. Bring the fence up to the end of the square, tighten the thumb screw and check it. Good. Holding the marking gauge correctly, thumb behind the pin so that that's where the force is going to be needed. We're going to draw a line out from our shoulder line along the end of the grain. If you don't press too hard and have the marking gauge under control, you should find that okay. If you're not sure how to use a marking gauge, I've got a tutorial on it, so you can have a quick look at that if you want to. And I'm going to work back from that shoulder line so that I don't accidentally make a mark that will show on top of the planter box. Quite important that this line doesn't go over that shoulder line. And as before, we'll use our sharp pencil just to go over that line so that we know where we're going. And the next stage is to cut down as far as this line that we've drawn. We'll take our guide piece, do exactly as we did before, make sure our guide piece is in the right position, which it is. Flex the saw so that the cut at the far end there is going to be exactly tight up against our guide piece. And when we started the curve, we can start cutting through, making sure that the saw is touching that guide piece at the top so that we're not sawing anything but vertically. And as we did before, having got that saw cut started, we can keep an eye on this line here to make sure we're sawing vertically. No pressure down, don't forget. And any tendency to go off the line, you've got to correct it as soon as you see it. Don't pretend that it's not happening. Very easy to hope for the best, and you don't want to hope for the best, you want it to be the best. Now we're down to the line on that side. I'm going to take it out to see if we're down to the line on the other side. No, we've got a little bit to go, and we're a little bit close to that line as well, so I'm going to tilt the saw over to make sure that doesn't get any worse. So I'm going to tilt it over that way a bit. Have another look. We're practically down to the line. I'm going to use my steel rule just to check that we are, yeah, we're pretty much there. The other thing I'm going to do is just check that my steel rule doesn't rock in that saw cut, and that's fine. So we can turn that round and do the other side. And now we're down to the line. So both sides are done. And the next stage, we'll be chiseling this out. And we'll tighten that up so that it's not going to move. We've got a block of wood at this far end, so our workmate is not going to move in that direction. I've sharpened my chisel so that it is sharp enough to shave with. And that's what your chisel should be like. Again, if you're not sure how to do that, I have got a tutorial on my channel that shows you how to sharpen your chisel to that degree of sharpness. We're going to use a woodworker's mallet and a 1-inch bevel edge chisel. And the first thing I'm going to show you how to do is to pare. And paring is a process where you take off thin layers of wood like that, a bit like a plain wood, but using a chisel. If you notice, the shavings are curling, looks a bit like a fingernail. And that tells me that the sharp edge of the chisel is guiding where the fibres cut. It's not splitting along the grain, it's the chisel that's separating the fibres in a controlled way. And the way you do that is you can either hold it 3 fingers, 1 finger thumb, or if you're more comfortable, closer to the sharp edge. I'll hold it 3 fingers, 1 finger thumb. You pinch it between your thumb and first finger, and before you're used to it, it's probably a good idea to wiggle and push. So if you wiggle left and right and push, the answer is you've got to keep it under control. Whenever you're using a sharp edge, the control you have over it is really important. And by holding it in the way I'm holding it, all my fingers are behind that sharp edge. There's no way, if it slips, it's going to cut me, because you've seen how sharp it is. And as you get used to it, you can do less wiggle and more push, providing you're under control. I'm pressing quite hard with my thumb so that the blade doesn't jump up. And I just want you to get used to the idea that that chisel can be used to take off really fine bits of material. Now it's going to take us a month of Sundays if we want to go down to that line using that technique, but we will be using it right at the end just to make the joint absolutely accurate. But what I need to do now is change my grip. I'm going to hold the chisel like that, and I'm going to hold the woodworker's mallet so that I'm using the weight of that heavy end against the end of the chisel. Never use a metal hammer. I know that these got polypropylene handles, but to me it's anathema to use a metal hammer head on a chisel. And what we're trying to do is to take off about 8 millimeters at a time, parallel to this line here. So I'm going to put my chisel back into where I was before, that sort of level, and with a sharp tap, so that the shock wave drives the chisel into the work, and the work hasn't got too much of a chance to move. I'm just going to take off that amount of material all the way along. And when I've got all the way to the other side, I'm just going to see what's happening on the edges here, because if I'm lucky, this grain will be dead straight along here, and this will be dead parallel, which it is. If I'm unlucky, I'll have a grain that sort of goes up in a arc or something, and it might be that it comes up, or if I'm very unlucky, it might go down, in which case you're going to have to take thinner chunks off. But that's working all right. And I'm going to go down with my second chop, another 6 millimeters or so. This time being really careful, I'm working parallel to the surface of the workmate, or parallel to the floor, and also parallel to this line. See, I've got about 2 millimeters there, which is what I want. Going up a bit, so I'm going to just go back to that 2 millimeters. And that's done it. And again, I'm going to check that I'm not creeping towards that line. I am a little bit, if you notice, here. But this is nice and parallel to that line. But this is going in a bit. So I've got to be a bit careful. Right, let's put this back in. The worst thing you can do is go below that line. And we're going to go back to this pairing action now. We're going to separate the fibres manually. So I'm going to go down to 1 millimeter. By doing it manually, I can take more care, keeping this parallel to the floor. I'm going to go back to that pairing action that I was doing before, making sure that I don't go behind the line. And I'm leaving myself about 1 millimeter above that line. If your chisel isn't sharp, you just won't be getting these results. You've got to have a really sharp chisel. Notice how I'm using the surface that I've created already to guide the chisel into the next cut. Good. Check again that I'm going parallel to that line. I'm very close to it. It's nice and parallel, and I'm pretty much on it. This bit, but if you notice, it's split downwards a bit there. Now for the last cut, I'm going to pop the chisel into that groove like that. I'm going to take off about 5 millimeters, wiggle and push really carefully. Now we don't want to go below that line. I'm checking here that I'm doing all right too. Good. And I can see some pencil left over from that groove that I cut with my marking gauge, because when you think about it, that groove is V-shaped, and if I'm cutting halfway into that groove, which I will be, I should be able to see pencil on the bottom edge of that V groove. A little bit at a time, nice and carefully, take your time. And make sure that this is a dead straight line that we're cutting here. You can see I can see my pencil mark all the way along there still, so I haven't gone below the line. I'm dead on it. Notice that my fingers are all behind the edge of the chisel, so there's no danger of me cutting myself. Now we haven't got a terribly smooth bottom to this joint, but that doesn't matter because nobody's going to see it, and it's impossible with the technique we're using and the open grain of this quite rough timber to get a dead smooth surface. It's going to lift off to an uneven surface. So I'm doing about 5 millimeters a go. I can still see my pencil mark all the way along there. And this last bit, I won't have to go right to the edge because that's already gone down to the line. So that looks pretty good. And if I want to having checked it first to make sure we're okay in terms of being parallel, which we are, I can just do a little bit of cleaning up by taking the chisel over that surface. And that should give me the joint I'm after. So if I put one of my side pieces in there, it should be nice and flush along here, and it should sit nice and vertically. Let's try that with a square, see what happens there. Good, I'm pleased. All we've got to do, just turn it around, do the same thing again. And that fits very nicely in there. Now there's a bit of a rock on that, and that's because the wood is a little bit cupped. If you have a look, you can see there's a gap in the middle there. So when I put that on, it's touching here, but it's not touching on the outsides. When we come to put this together and we put the decking screws in here, I'm going to use a clamp to pull that up into place so that that gap will disappear. So I've now completed all my components. I've got two pieces that are 430 millimeters long, two pieces that are 222 millimeters long with 165 millimeter gap between the shoulder lines, and I've got two offcuts from these pieces that are 222 millimeters long. And all we've got to do now is to assemble all those components. Well, if you're still with me after half an hour, I guess you found the content at least useful. If you did, don't forget to give the video a thumbs up, and if you want to see what else I do on my channel, there's a little red button that you can use to subscribe with. As I said earlier, we'll be using decking screws to hold our planter box together. And I want that decking screw to pass through that front and back component and enter the end bit at about this point, halfway between here and here, and that distance is at 9 millimeters. If I have it too far out, it's possible that it'll enter into one of these grooves, and I don't want that to weaken the joint. So if I draw a line at 9 millimeters from both ends of the front and back pieces, we'll be able to drill the holes in the right place. Put a mark at 9 millimeters. And rather than squaring the line all the way across, what we'll do instead is to just put a little mark either side of that groove and a little mark either side of that groove. And we'll do the same the other end. That'll save us getting rid of that line later. Remember to use your reference edge because you know that's nice and straight. There, and we want a line in this position and a little line in that position. Like that. I'll do the same on the other piece. To start my drill off, I'm going to use a scriber. I'm just going to put a little mark exactly where I want that drill bit to go in, just to guide it, and check that I'm right in the middle of that line, which I am. And do the same on all four bits. I put some scrap material underneath the holes that I'm going to drill so that I don't get the breakout when the drill goes through the material. And I'm going to put a 3.5 millimeter drill bit exactly over that scribed indentation. And I'm using a hand drill, keeping the drill dead vertical to drill through. Clear the flutes, you'll be absolutely certain that you've gone through the material. And similarly with this one. And same down this end. I'm going to go through those holes with a 4.5mm drill bit, which will be a clearance hole for the decking screw. And that means that when I screw the two pieces together, this piece will be pulled onto the joint. If it was a tight fit, the screw wouldn't have that action. And lastly, I'm going to use a countersink bit to put a trumpet mouth on the entrance to those holes, so that when I put the screw in there, it's going to bury its head into the surface of the material. But I'm not going to take too much off, because I don't want to sink that screw too far in. So that's that piece prepared, and I'll do the same with this one. Now, the magic moment. We're going to put the whole thing together. I've set my work up so that my clamps are absolutely parallel with the front and back of my box, and I've set this clamp up so that it's as close as I can get it to where I'm going to put the screw in. If you notice, I've put these pads dead on the corner, so the corner of the pads match the corner of the box. For that reason, everything has remained square. If you put those on crooked, then you're going to pull the whole thing out of square. But this is dead square, and that's how I want it. So without further ado, I'll pop in the first of our decking screws. Make sure your screwdriver is exactly the right size for the head of the screw that you're going to pop in. And because I've got that so tightly clamped, I know that that is going to be going into exactly the right place. I just do it up reasonably tight, but not forcing it too far, because I don't want that head to go too far into the wood. I'm going to have to reset this clamp so that I can put pressure on this joint in the same way. So you only need 2 of those clamps. Let's do that. Getting it as close as I can to the joint so that it pulls it up nice and tight. Make sure it's flush on top, which it is. And we can now put the second of our screws in. I'm going to force it over in this direction so there's no chance of it coming out the side. So I'm just going to put my finger there until it's got a grip. And then I'll know that that's going to go in the right place. And again, just up so that I've got it hand tight. That shouldn't move. Now I can turn the whole thing around and do the other side. Before you tighten it up, just check that these surfaces are dead flush. And the corner of the pads matching the corners of your box. Pushing that screw over so that it's going in at a slight angle, so there's no chance of it coming out. And now we can turn the whole thing upside down and go through the same process again. And that's our box pretty much complete, and it should be nice and square. Nice and square that way, nice and square that way, And nice and square it is. Good. So the last thing we need to do is to put those feet on, and they're going to go on like this, and we're going to put one here and one there. We might just put the moulding on the outside, I think, so that it's at least symmetrical. And we need to mark in halfway across here. Now, if you remember, that measurement was 28. Half of 28 is 14, so we've got to put a mark at 14 millimeters and drill a hole through. I set my marking gauge to 14 millimeters, which is there. I can put a small mark across there, and through there, similarly. And we'll do the same as we did before. We'll put a scriber mark where those two lines cross. Like that. We'll put a piece of wood underneath the bit we're drilling. And we use a 4.5 millimeter drill to drill the hole. And we'll just countersink that. Just plane off those marks. Good. Done. To position these, all we have to do is use a scrap piece of material to pop inside the box like that and line it up. And we'll just check we're going to put those around the right way. And we'll pop those screws in. And there we are. Not bad. Will that planter fit? Let's go and have a look. Could have been made for it. Brilliant. Well, I really hope you enjoyed watching the video, and if you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button if you want to see what else I've got on my channel. If you are going to have a go at making this planter box, then it'll be useful to you to have a list of all the tools that I've used, and for that reason I've put a complete list in the description below. The other thing that might be helpful are the two end frames that I put at the end of this video. The first one is another project that you might want to have a go at, and the second one is to show you how to use a marking gauge properly, which, as you've seen, is an integral part of making this. Well, give it a go. Let me know how you get on in the comments, and I will look forward to seeing you in my next video. Happy woodworking!